never thought I'd be standing in my son's kitchen, watching my own blood treat me like a stranger who'd overstayed their welcome. But that's exactly where I found myself last Christmas, holding the pieces of something I'd spent months creating, while everyone around me acted like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. My name is Eleanor. I'm 72 years old, and until 6 months ago, I believed that family meant everything. I believed that love was unconditional, that grandchildren were blessings, and that the hours I spent knitting, cooking, and caring meant something to the people I called my own. I was wrong about all of it. The gift I'd made for my grandson Tyler wasn't just any sweater. It was a masterpiece of patience and love. I'd started it in September, choosing the softest wool I could afford in his favorite colors, deep blue with silver threads running through it. Every stitch was deliberate, every pattern carefully planned. I'd incorporated his initials, a small basketball since he loved the sport, and even managed to work in the logo of his favorite team. It took me 4 months of late nights, sore fingers, and countless do-overs to get it perfect. Tyler was turning 16, and I wanted to give him something special, something that would show him how much his grandmother cared, something he could wear and think of me. I wrapped it in tissue paper, placed it in a beautiful box, and drove 40 minutes to my son David's house for the birthday party. The moment I handed Tyler the box, I should have known. He barely looked at me, muttered a distracted, "Thanks, Grandma," while scrolling through his phone. His friends were there, a group of teenagers who seemed to find everything hilarious. I watched him unwrap it, my heart pounding with anticipation, ready to see his face light up. Instead, he held up the sweater, looked at it for exactly 3 seconds, and said, "What is this supposed to be?" The room went quiet for a moment. I started to explain. The hours I'd spent, the thought I'd put into every detail, how I'd made it specifically for him. But before I could finish, one of his friends snickered and said, "Dude, your grandma made you a grandpa sweater." That's when it happened. Tyler, my grandson, the boy I'd held as a baby, laughed. Not a polite laugh, not an uncomfortable laugh, but a genuine, cruel laugh. He held up the sweater like it was a joke, showed it to his friends, and said, "Look at this thing. It's so ugly." Then he did something that broke me completely. He tossed it on the floor, stepped on it with his sneaker, and said, "Sorry, Grandma, but this is trash." The room erupted in laughter. His friends were practically rolling on the floor. And my son David? He chuckled and said, "Mom, you know kids. Today don't wear homemade stuff. Maybe next time just get him a gift card." My daughter-in-law Sarah rolled her eyes and added, "Honestly, Eleanor, you really should have asked what he wanted before spending all that time." I stood there, frozen, watching my grandson wipe his shoe on the sweater I'd poured my heart into. Nobody defended me. Nobody told him to apologize. They all acted like I was the one being unreasonable for expecting basic respect. I picked up the sweater from the floor, brushed off the dirt, and quietly said, "I think I should go." Nobody protested. Nobody asked me to stay. David handed me my coat and said, "Drive safe, Mom. Thanks for coming." I drove home in complete silence, the trashed sweater on the passenger seat beside me. When I got to my little apartment, I sat in my chair and stared at it for hours. The stitches were perfect. The pattern was beautiful. The love was still there in every thread, even if it had been trampled on. That night, I made a decision. I was done. The next morning, I took the sweater to Mrs. Chen, who ran the alterations shop downtown. I'd known her for years, but we'd never really talked beyond polite greetings. She looked at the sweater, then at me, and her expression softened. "This is beautiful work," she said, running her fingers over the intricate pattern. "Who made this?" "I did," I said quietly. "For my grandson. He didn't want it." Mrs. Chen frowned. "His loss. This is museum quality. You have incredible skill." Her words were the first kind ones I'd heard about my work in months. I felt tears welling up, and before I knew it, I was telling her everything. About Tyler, about the party, about how dismissed I felt by my own family. Mrs. Chen listened without judgment, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she said something that changed everything. "You know, there's a community center near here that teaches knitting to kids whose grandparents can't be with them. Mostly foster children, children of deployed military parents. They would treasure something like this." That afternoon, Mrs. Chen took me to the community center. It was a modest building with bright yellow walls and the sound of children's laughter echoing from every room. The director, a woman named Maria, showed me around. In the craft room, I saw children working on simple knitting projects, their faces focused and determined. Many of these children have never had someone teach them traditional skills, Maria explained. Their guardians are often too busy, or they don't know how themselves. We have volunteers, but we could always use someone with real expertise. I watched a little girl, maybe 8 years old, struggling with basic stitches. Her tongue was poking out in concentration, and when she dropped a stitch, she looked so frustrated. Without thinking, I walked over and sat beside her. "Here, let me show you a trick," I said gently. I showed her how to pick up the dropped stitch, how to keep her tension even. Her face lit up when she got it right. "You're so good at this," she said. "Are you a grandma?" The question hit me like a punch, but I smiled. "I am, but not yours. Would you like me to be your knitting grandma?" From that day forward, I started volunteering at the community center 3 times a week. I taught knitting, crocheting, and basic sewing to children who hung on my every word. They called me Grandma Eleanor, and unlike my real grandson, they actually listened when I spoke. There was Marcus, age 10, whose mother was deployed overseas. He learned to knit dishcloths and sent them to her in care packages. There was Sophia, age 12, who'd been in foster care for 3 years. She made scarves for all the other kids in her group home. There was James, age 7, whose parents worked 3 jobs between them and never had time for crafts. He made a hat for his baby sister and wore it to show everyone at the center. These children didn't laugh at my gifts. They treasured them. They wore the hats I made them until they fell apart. They brought their friends to meet me. They hugged me when I arrived and begged me not to leave when my shift was over. Meanwhile, my biological family had barely noticed my absence. David called once to ask if I was feeling all right because I'd missed Tyler's basketball game. I told him I was busy with volunteer work. He said, "That's nice," and hung up. 3 months into my volunteering, something wonderful happened. The community center was having a showcase where the children could display their handmade projects. I helped them set up their knitting, their little pottery pieces, their drawings. The room was filled with proud children and their guardians, all celebrating creativity and accomplishment. That's when I saw her. A woman about my age, with silver hair and kind eyes, was admiring Marcus's dishcloths. She turned to me and said, "These are beautifully taught. The stitches are so even for such a young student." Her name was Dorothy, and she was there with her neighbor's daughter, a girl whose grandmother lived too far away to visit. Dorothy had driven an hour just to attend the showcase because the little girl had no family there. "You remind me of my grandmother," Dorothy said as we talked. "She taught me to knit when I was 7. I still have the first scarf I ever made." We talked for 2 hours that day. Dorothy had been widowed for 5 years, had grown children who lived across the country, and called maybe once a month. She understood the loneliness, the feeling of being forgotten by the people who were supposed to care most. We started meeting for coffee every Tuesday. Then Thursday craft sessions at the center became something we did together. Dorothy taught me quilting. I taught her some advanced knitting techniques. We became genuine friends, the kind who could sit in comfortable silence or talk for hours without getting bored. Soon, our circle grew. There was Janet, who'd lost her husband and whose adult children were too busy with their own lives to visit. There was Patricia, whose grandchildren lived in another state and only saw her at Christmas. There was Rose, who'd never married, but had spent 30 years teaching school and missed having young people around. We called ourselves the chosen grandmas, and we became each other's family. We celebrated birthdays, shared holidays, supported each other through difficulties. When Dorothy had surgery, we all took turns staying with her. When Patricia's cat died, we held a little memorial service in her backyard. When Rose got pneumonia, we made sure she had homemade soup every day until she recovered. The children at the community center became our shared grandchildren. We attended their school plays, cheered at their sports games, helped with homework. They made us Mother's Day cards and included all of us in their family drawings for school projects. 6 months after Tyler had trashed my sweater, I received a call from David. He sounded annoyed. "Mom, Tyler's been asking about that sweater you made him. He says he wants to wear it to school because his girlfriend thinks homemade stuff is cool now. Do you still have it?" I looked across my living room, where Dorothy was teaching little Sophia to bind off her first scarf. Marcus was showing Rose how to shoot basketball in my hallway. Patricia was reading a story to 2 of the younger children who'd come over for our weekly gathering. "No," I said calmly. "I don't have it anymore." "Well, can you make another one? Tyler really wants it now." I almost laughed. "David, that sweater took me 4 months to make. Tyler threw it on the floor and called it trash. I'm not making another one." "Come on, Mom. He was just being a teenager. He's sorry now." "Is he? Has he called to apologize?" David was quiet for a moment. "Well, no, but you know how kids are." "Yes, I do know how kids are. The children I spend time with now would never dream of treating someone's gift that way, no matter their age." There was a pause. "What children?" I told him about the community center, about my volunteer work, about the children who called me Grandma Eleanor and meant it. I told him about Dorothy and the other women who'd become my real family. I told him about the birthday parties where my presence was celebrated, not tolerated. "So you're saying you're too busy for your real family now?" David asked, his voice getting sharp. "No, David. I'm saying I finally found my real family, and they would never laugh at a gift I'd made with love." The conversation ended awkwardly, with David clearly not understanding what had changed. But I understood perfectly. I'd spent 72 years believing that sharing DNA made people family. I'd learned that real family is made up of people who value you, respect you, and appreciate what you bring to their lives. A week later, Tyler showed up at my apartment. He was alone, which surprised me. He looked uncomfortable, shuffling his feet and avoiding eye contact. "Hey, Grandma," he said. "Dad said you gave away that sweater you made me." "I did. I was thinking maybe I could have it back, or maybe you could make me a new one." I studied his face. There was no remorse there, just want. "Tyler, do you remember what you said when I gave you that sweater?" He shrugged. "I was just messing around. My friends thought it was funny." "You called it trash. You stepped on it." "Yeah, but I didn't mean it." "Then why did you do it?" He looked confused by the question. "I don't know. Everyone was laughing." That's when I realized the truth. Tyler wasn't sorry for hurting me. He was sorry for missing out on something he now wanted. There's a difference, and it's a crucial one. Tyler, I spent 4 months making that sweater because I love you. I put thought into every detail because I wanted you to have something special. When you threw it on the floor, you weren't just rejecting a gift. You were rejecting my love. He started to protest, but I held up my hand. I've learned something important in the past few months. Love isn't about blood or obligation. It's about respect, appreciation, and kindness. The children I work with now understand that. They treasure the things I make for them because they understand what it means when someone spends time creating something just for you. Tyler looked annoyed. So you're not going to make me a new sweater? No, Tyler, I'm not. But I hope someday you'll understand why. He left without another word, probably frustrated that his grandmother wouldn't give him what he wanted. But I felt peaceful for the first time in months. That evening, the chosen grandmas gathered at Dorothy's house for our weekly dinner. Marcus had learned a new knitting stitch and wanted to show everyone. Sophia had finished her first baby blanket for the community center's new family. Rose had brought pictures from her former student's wedding, where she'd been invited as an honored guest. As I sat around Dorothy's table, surrounded by women who'd become my sisters and children who'd chosen me as their grandmother, I realized something profound. I hadn't lost a family. I'd found a real one. The sweater Tyler had trashed was long gone, given to a grateful child who wore it with pride. But the love I'd put into those stitches lived on in every hat, scarf, and blanket I made for children, who understood its value. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to have. Sometimes you have to go out and find your people, the ones who see your worth and celebrate your gifts instead of mocking them. I'm 72 years old, and I've learned that real family isn't about sharing last names or holiday obligations. It's about sharing respect, love, and appreciation. It's about people who would never laugh at your gifts because they understand the love behind them. David still calls occasionally, usually when he needs something. Tyler never apologized, never tried to visit again. And you know what? I'm perfectly fine with that. I have Marcus teaching me basketball tricks, Sophia showing me TikTok dances, and Dorothy helping me plan our next quilting project. I have birthday parties where I'm the guest of honor, not the afterthought. I have children who hug me tight and tell me they love me. I have friends who check on me when I'm sick and celebrate my accomplishments like they're their own. They didn't reject my gift. They treasured it, and in return, I found something more valuable than any sweater I could ever knit. A family that chose me, just as I chose them. The laughter in my life now isn't at my expense. It's the sound of joy, shared by people who genuinely care about each other. And that makes all the difference in the world.